policy issues through the cross-sector lens. And I am excited that this panel actually perfectly represents three of the sectors. From the private sector, we have Nick. From the government sector, we have Kevin. And from the nonprofit sector, we have Jim. Just as a quick place to start, and we'll start with you, Jim. Tell us a little bit about your work at the Homeland Security Advisory Council and how this nonprofit is working in response to crisis management and disaster preparedness.
Thank you, Pete. Am I on?
Yep.
Good, perfect. Good morning. Again, thanks for the opportunity to be on this panel. While you have me here, these guys are rock stars. Anyway, so the Homeland Security Advisory Council was a nonprofit that was created in the wake of 9/11, and it was with local business, I call them titans, who felt that government shouldn't do it all alone, and that there was an opportunity, especially with the emotion and the interest in Homeland Security, the crisis and disaster management after 9/11. And so over the years, they've worked to make public-private partnership more than just a tagline. In the crisis management world, they're actually bringing some things to reality. Fast forward to about 3 years ago, there was a change of leadership. Peter Lowy, who at that time owned all the Westfield malls in the country, he took over. He wanted to give it a little different shape. He asked me about coming in, and I said, nope, I like where I am. At that time, I was the emergency manager for the city of LA. Long story short, I finally kind of retired and came in, and having come right out of government, I knew what the immediate gaps were, and also knew what the private sector could do to help government do better in the crisis management world.
Kevin, your work in Ventura County. Tell us a little bit about that.
We got some fans. Everyone should be a fan. Our whole county looks just like this. Thanks, Pete, for bringing me on board and the panelists here with me. So Ventura County Sheriff's Office of Emergency Services is an all hazards, all phase emergency management program. And so what that means is we do preparedness, planning, response, and recovery efforts for large scale incidents and disasters. And they're all hazards. So we really focus on natural disasters, human caused disasters, and technologically caused disasters. So our some of our main objectives are in the response and recovery phase. We run the Emergency Operations Center. We do a lot of the support and coordination for things that are taking place out in the field, such as evacuations, shelter. And why I'm here, I guess, today is we live and die by cross-sector leadership. So I think something that all of us will echo throughout this is that emergency management, the pillar it's based on is cross-sector leadership. We usually phrase it differently. Kind of a term of art that's around right now is whole community approach. You hear that echoed a lot from the federal level all the way through the local level, but it really is cross-sector, and because no response or recovery is successful without the whole community, and then that transcends into the preparedness piece too. So it's a pleasure being here.
Nick, your work at Amgen on the private sector here, also regionally. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do.
Sure, you bet. I have a few different hats. I'm old, I have ADHD, I've been working for a long time, and had a blessing to be in a variety of different roles, including heading up a nonprofit for 5 years up in Santa Barbara. But I currently work at Amgen. Amgen is the largest private sector employer for Ventura County. Amgen is 3,000 people in over 100 countries. We sell in over 160 countries. We are about serving patients. We're a pharma biotech company, and we take it seriously. Not only do we look after our employees with crisis management, which is one of the things that I'm very closely involved with, but we know we can't do it alone. We coordinate with local county, Ventura County. We believe in so much that we have some funding to be able to have an emergency operations center for our local, national, and worldwide responses that we do for a company, but we are the backup EOC for Ventura. For some reason, Kevin's EOC gets shut down, Amgen's will go live and be able to work on that. So it's just another way that we do it. One of the biggest lessons that we learn is that we can't do it alone. It is about the networking. It is about people like you being evangelists for this type of networking. And I didn't coin the phrase, but I love it. It was from a commander from LAPD that said that inside of an emergency operations center during a crisis is not the time to exchange business cards. You want to meet people. You want to have that relationship. You want to be able to say, oh, Kevin, Jim, Dean Peterson, we need some help. We need some. That is the way to do it from your network that you can call on ahead of time. Very quickly, before I hand it back to Dean Peterson, today is October 1st. This is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. I've had immediate family members, 2 different ones that have been affected by breast cancer. Wear pink, get people to talk about it. It is a curable disease in many different instances, but proselytize that as your will.
Thank you for that. I want to circle to you, Kevin. One of the things that I've learned as we've been building the cross-sector program here is that much of my work here at the policy school has been working at the state and local government level, and that many of them, you mentioned before that the cross-sector term is still one that is not widely understood, and maybe as Karen mentioned in her excellent remarks, this is still a different way of thinking about leadership. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how you've seen the evolution of this appreciation that we need to be working across sectors. I think that the field of crisis management and disaster preparedness is kind of uniquely situated as one that demands this kind of leadership. But I wonder if you've seen an evolution in this understanding from the government's perspective that you need to be working across sectors.
Yeah, thanks for the softball question.
So maybe there are more of them.
So as I was saying initially, or in my initial remarks about how in emergency management we're kind of right at our birth, we're looking at the ability to do cross-sector leadership as intrinsic to our success. And you might not see that in all functions of government. And some of those challenges arise from just a basic tenet of trust. And, governance is, inherent to its word, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that you're partnering with someone. Sometimes governing can be an adversarial relationship that can be born out of regulatory agencies, law enforcement. So sometimes we're bringing together disparate groups of people that in their day-to-day world might have some sort of relationship that's not necessarily a partnership. And a big part of cross-sector leadership is drilling down to common interests and getting away from things that separate us, but bringing us together in what would be a common interest. And I'll give a good example would be oil spills. So oil spills tend to be very challenging disasters or incidents to respond to because everyone coming to that table from the nonprofit sector, from the government sector, from the business sector is all coming from an adversarial relationship. People don't like oil being spilled in the water or on land, and the groups that support changes to those issues don't necessarily want to be a part of it. How our laws are written is that the private sector is very much responsible for the response and the recovery. And in emergency management, there's a huge value in bringing all these groups together for a common interest. And sometimes that's a big role that you're playing. And I'll steal something Jim probably will say, so I'm going to steal it from him. But it's being a convener and utilizing your position to convene groups so that you can fight through those other types of issues, whether they're adversarial or not, and utilizing the group to form best interest and having the best idea win, and then utilizing that to respond and recover from the incident.
Jim, I want to draw you in on this because you've had a cross-sector career, much less understanding this leadership. How have you seen as you've transitioned from your work in government to now leading a nonprofit in this space, the awareness of the necessity of working across sectors?
Well, I would have to echo a lot of what Kevin said, and he said the group, whether it's the emergency manager, which is a critical part of their skill set, is the ability to convene. You don't necessarily have to have operational or statutory control over the various parties or assets, but if you have the ability to convene, you can leverage that. The other thing is in the cross-sector capabilities, Jack Dangerman, who runs Esri, he said something this summer at their user conference. He says collaboration at the speed of trust. And so it's really significant that all the sectors trust, and it goes way. I mean, that knife cuts in both directions. You know, the private sector is leery of the public sector because the public sector is viewed as not being efficient, having draconian and antiquated processes, which is true. And then the public sector looks at the private sector and says everything is profit motivated, which is true. So, but understanding that, then you have to trust that everyone will come together. And it's the conveners that make the cross-sector effort actually work. And Emily will remember this because we talked about it in class. I talk about, the convening is honoring all perspectives and all capabilities. Because you've heard the analogy about the cube, and you have a peephole on the right and a peephole on top. You say, Kevin, what do you see? Kevin says, I see a triangle. And you say, Dean Peterson, what do you see? He says, I see a circle. But the convener gets these two perspectives together, and they collectively come up with the vision that there's actually a cone inside this cube. But if you just stayed with your specific perspective, you wouldn't have the overall, or in our world, the unified perspective. And I'm talking visually, but if you talk about efforts, whether it's raising money, whether it's addressing a crisis like an oil spill, you have to be able to honor and trust and convene the various levels.
Mm-hmm. Nick, obviously from the private sector perspective, you're uniquely positioned to be someone who is a cross-sector leader, and you've had a cross-sector career yourself. How would you describe the evolution of this understanding? And at Amgen and other private sector companies, has there been growing awareness of the need for these kinds of cross-sector relationships?
Every day impacts us, and we learn hopefully every single day as well. So one of the other hats that I come to, I've been a reserve deputy with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department for over 25 years, and I've worked in local government on disasters, emergencies, everything from canine and search and rescue to intelligence. And coming from that perspective of the county and going to private sector, we compare at Amgen ourselves to some of the century-old pharmaceutical companies where there's a lot of inertia and it takes time, and we're experienced and we have a process for doing that. Amgen being around for 35 years or so, we can make split-second decisions. We are utilizing that, and we're training people in now what is called an agile point of view, an agile workspace, into this immediate solution implementing and then fine-tuning it as you go forward. So in leadership, and especially coming from the experience with the county, where it kind of takes a while to get stuff done, and I'm sure the city's kind of the same way, where I'm sure we're trying to be immediate. It's all about leadership, and I think the best thing that we can do as leaders is to trust our teams. If our teams have a need, if they have a solution, support them, go with it. You can use your years of experience and position to look out for obstacles, but let them run with it. Just because it's not your idea doesn't make sure it's not the best idea that's out there, and let's be creative and empower people to make some of these new creative decisions. We have an internship every summer where we have over 120 interns coming from all different colleges, undergrad and graduate students. Those are the people whom we learn from. They think that they're coming in order to learn from us. We're constantly tapping. I was one of the heads of cybersecurity for 5 years at Amgen, and I want to know what the college students are doing, and being able to be in a leadership role, empower, trust, and implement those, and just kind of pave the pathway, cut the red tape to allow some of these people in emergent situations, whether it's us, whether it's local government, whether it's city, whether it's nonprofits, to be able to help us in times of crisis.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna add one additional
Kevin
thing
completely
from-
disagrees.
No. Well, we do move really fast in Ventura County.
That's true.
I was just
Kevin does move.
I was just going to add that, an important part of this cross-sector leadership discussion is how it relates to our growing complexity in society. So it's almost a requirement nowadays to be a cross-sector leader to succeed, because whether you like it or not, our world is infinitely more complex than it was, say, even 10, 15 years ago. And the littlest disruption causes significant disruptions downstream. So you think of something Jim and I have spent many of days discussing, but an earthquake that hit in, say, 1994 in Northridge, if that same type of an event occurs today, there's going to even be more significant disruptions because we have just-in-time shipping. So if you thought about what you could get from your grocery store back in 1994, it was significantly more because they warehoused on site a substantial amount more of food and water and some of those like necessities that don't exist today. The average grocery store today has just in time. They get resupplied every day, if not every other day. So this level of complexity, and you hit on it, Nick, with the cyber, is much more complex. We know much less about that level of complexity. So our resiliency and how we respond and recover from those disruptions is strained. And really the only silver bullet that I know of is this cross-sector leadership topic.
I want to come to you, Jim, but I also want you to, the Homeland Security Advisory Council is really a treasure in the Los Angeles area, and I think is a real model. I want to get now into a discussion about the unique roles that your sectors play in the cross-sector space. And when we were talking in our panel prep call, you had mentioned in some ways you see HSAC as Switzerland, right?
Yes.
And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, the unique role that you play, having the great network of connections you have in the city and county leadership in Los Angeles, but the role that as a nonprofit leader you can play uniquely in crisis management.
So all agencies, sectors, organizations have their unique and very parochial identities. And so I'm sure Kevin has to deal with Big Blue and Big Red, fire and law enforcement. So and then the pharma versus grocery versus transportation. As a nonprofit, we're Switzerland in the sense that we're not blue, we're not red, we're not pharma, we're not fuels, we're not water. So we have this neutral-like position, which allows us to actually figuratively be the convener. We have an interest in the fight, but we don't have necessarily a dog in the fight that the different agencies and institutions have. So when we present something, and we have continued to try to position ourselves in the position as a thought leader, not only just a service provider, but a thought leader to actually kind of guide the discourse in greater LA region about cross-sector capabilities and crisis management and emergency preparedness. Kevin was talking about, this speaks a lot to the importance of the cross-sector relationships. In Puerto Rico, we're doing, so one of the things we do at ASAC is we're doing a whole thing on supply chain resiliency. And so some of our look has been at Puerto Rico. FEMA has several millions, I think it's like 7 million MREs on the island of Puerto Rico. So you go back and you watch the ramp up for Hurricane Maria, as FEMA was rushing, the crisis logisticians were rushing to get this emergency food on the island. Post-incident, you go back and you look at the resiliency of the local grocery sector. It came up to vertical the same time FEMA was coming up to getting these meals on the island. So if there had been a stronger and more effective cross-sector relationship there, FEMA's crisis logisticians could have been more strategic. So one of the things that we're working with MIT right now and looking at sentinel points in the various supply chains to be able to sense that, okay, where's the grocery sector on day 10 of this crisis? Where's the grocery sector on day 20? Where are the FEMA logisticians on day 10 and day 20? So you know, one of the things, like I said, is us being Switzerland, we're able to say, hey FEMA, we have this information, or hey, Acme Groceries, we have this information, let's take a look at it. Because we, you know, as Switzerland, we aren't partial to any one side, our partiality is towards solutions.
Yeah, that's great. Nick, as Karen had mentioned in her remarks, the private sector does bring a particular perspective. They bring a certain culture that's usually one of speed, at least perceived speed, and one that may have financial resources and technological resources that the other sectors don't present. I wonder if you could talk a little bit of how you view the advantages of that private sector culture and capacity to these cross-sector relationships.
Absolutely, and our keynote speaker was amazing. And as you talked about the nonprofits being that trusted vehicle, I think Jim personifies that, where you can bring people together, they're not threatened by it, so amazing, kudos. Talking about lessons learned and how we make mistakes now, we learn from every day. Hurricane Maria, as of like 4 days ago, was the 1-year anniversary for that. Amgen, 90% of Amgen's materials where we're going out and treating cancer patients and patients with no other therapeutic hopes go through Puerto Rico. Whether we make it there, packaged and shipped through there, Puerto Rico is crucial to Amgen's delivery service. And our motto, our mission is to serve patients and every dose, every time. That's the second part of our mission. So Puerto Rico is important to us. We have over 3,000 employees on the island, Puerto Rico. Hurricane, it happened. We built a resilient facility. It's an amazing facility down there, but we're still greatly impacted because Maria flew right over the top of it. We had 600 people working at the time of the hurricane in bunkers trying to keep things going. But outside, part of it was destroyed. It's not just our facility. It's the employees' families. So if you have an employee that's worried about their mother, their wife, their newborn child, they're worthless at work, and you don't want them to be at work. Amgen, because of resources, we flew in 2,500 generators for our employees and had them distributed out, as well as gas cans, the collapsible gas cans, because we had neighborhoods of our employees plugging into our generators. So can I turn my refrigerator on for a couple hours? Can we have this fan on? Can we have news on? It brought the communities together. Because of the way that we built the facility, we had fire department, police department, they would be coming and they'd do showers, they do laundry services, so it's supporting that. Fabulously, we do have the luck and the resources and the planning in order to do that, and we did some strategic placements ahead of time, but what we learned, we didn't do enough ahead of time. So, when the next one come in, and part of our crisis watch and partnering with local, state, and federal law enforcement worldwide is we're watching for the next one, and if we see something, if we see those triggers, boy, we're gonna ramp up just like that, and hopefully we get that vertical peak that James so eloquently described.
I want to talk about the challenges. I think that's going to be one of the themes for today, and I think, again, Karen really set the table for what I hope are some of the themes that we discover here are that even if the policy issues are different, the challenges between the sectors as well as the opportunities, I think we're going to see some themes reveal themselves. So I want you to be self-effacing and look at your own sector and say, as it relates to working across the sectors, where are the places that you see your sector improving to either build partnerships or convene partnerships or to seek out other resources, specifically in this area of disaster response? And Nick, I'll come back to you. Not speaking specifically for Amgen, but for the private sector, where do you see some of the challenges your sector faces in building some of these important relationships?
Yeah, so policy, we have a big government affairs office in Washington, D.C. that's really out there and really upfront, getting in people's faces, asking questions. So these generators, we're empowering not just the employees, the families, their neighborhoods. You can't give them as a gift. If you give them to someone, then you have to tax them on it. Okay, the value of this is $400, but the employee's gonna have to pay like $100, $150 worth of taxes for that. The company can't offset that because then that's added income. So the red tape, the policy, so this is part of, and it's not just Amgen, it's anyone that tries to reach out in time of crisis and help someone, how much are you helping them in the meantime, and how much headache are you causing from the next year to April 15th, or for following years? We have to support these employees now with experts in tax care, and okay, it'd probably be better if you do this, we can't tell you what to do, or well, maybe this generator is gonna be property of Amgen, but then I'm global head of investigation, so if one of these things disappears because it's property of Amgen, then we have to go look for it. And it's just, so the policy end of it, for all of us, and all the major pharma companies are on Puerto Rico. We're all dealing with this, and it's not just Puerto Rico, it's all over the world.
Jim, to you on the nonprofit sector, or even thinking back on your government sector.
Echo. So we have a dynamic state-of-the-art information sharing platform called SAL. It's an initial investment of $1.4 million that we give to government agencies in the greater LA area.
This is a mapping
This
platform.
is a dynamic mapping. What it does is it takes open source data and it gives it geospatial context. So everybody says, well, Google Maps. No, this is Google Maps on triple steroids.
Security.
And we give it. It was the public-facing interactive map during the December fires. It was the real-time situational tool for the marathon. So for years, all runners have an RF chip in their number bib. That data has been available for years. Government never had the wherewithal to integrate that data into their real-time crisis management situational mapping. We gave it away. So all the major public safety entities in and around Los Angeles were gifted the SALIS tool. I've had probably 24 governmental attorneys review this gift MOU. And in fact, the city of Los Angeles, which I know and love dearly, we developed what we call a donut strategy. We gave it away to all the communities around the city because the city dragged its feet taking this tool. This was a gift. So the process, and the Sheriff's Department said, well, you can't give it to us because you at least charge us $1. So government processes are a big hinder. You can't give good things to government, and coming from government, that really pains me.
Kevin?
So I'll loop back to, because I echo everything here, something that we said initially with the word trust. And sometimes it's getting out of the way. Sometimes our worst issue is inserting ourselves into places that there's other organizations or leaders that can do it better, faster, more efficient, more effective. In our world, for the most part, everyone gets into this line of work to do good. And so when you want to do good, you want to get involved with things. And sometimes getting involved the best way is actually not getting involved and stepping back. And it's something that is really hard for government because we tend to, especially in this day and age when the expectation is that government does so much for so many, there's almost a pressure to keep people involved. One success on our front in Ventura County has been bringing everyone together through the mechanism of our disaster council. So the state, through a law that governs kind of emergency services at the state level, requires counties, every county in the state, to have a disaster council. And we created a disaster council that's reflective of our entire whole community. So Amgen actually sits on our disaster council. Red Cross is one of our co-chairs of our disaster council. But one thing that it's near and dear to my heart is that meetings are the death of a lot of good things. So we try not to be meeting-centric, and we try to be action-oriented. And so every one of our disaster councils, when we do meet, it's action-oriented. We do debriefs of previous incidents. We present or showcase new action-oriented benefits. So if there's a new tool out there, and then what that does is it really builds trust with all these different organizations so that when an incident does occur, it's not so hard to step out of the way When you see an organization that you have trust in can bring something to the fight, you're more than happy to let them go out and take action. And then you're there to support, coordinate, do whatever you need to do to ensure their success. And you don't see that a lot in contemporary America right now. You see a lot of big organizations want to bolster down and try and drive that, and tend to not be so successful. So
That actually transitions to what will be my last question. We began this conversation with the note about a crisis is the worst time to be presenting someone a business card and introducing yourself. I think we're going to see throughout the panels and discussions today that trust between the sectors and among the sectors is really so crucial, and especially in your all line of work. Tell us a little bit, and Nick, I'll start with you, about how you build those relationships with other sectors out between the crises.
Sure, you bet. And I'm just thinking that Jim should have on the back of his business card, purveyors of trust. You know, sponsored by,
Yeah.
California State. Anyhow. Biggest part of trust is knowing people that you're interested in what they have to say, that you're welcoming, and that you're offering, and you want to be helpful. It's getting out there. Whether you're an introvert, extrovert. I'm an introvert. I really would prefer to be in a room alone, but I know I need to my wife's an actress, so I need to be putting on that acting face and going out and talking to people, because that's what makes a difference. You can do a lot online, but face-to-face, personal flesh, that is the way to go. One of the most important parts about meeting people that we see for the culture, whether you're working with nonprofits, whether they're fire, police, government, local, city, federal, and the federal liaison, is communication, common terms. Our keynote speaker talked about Cal OES. I worked with Cal OES for a year. One of the best things that they did for fire, and Chief, you probably remember this, is they came up with common language, what they would call, whether it's a truck, whether it's brush response, whether it's quint, coming up with a common language. Because I need to be going to Kevin with Amgen in disaster, with people's houses burning, our employees burning in fires. I need to tell him exactly what I need, and he needs to understand those exact words, and we need to share that common language. So communication, the common language, even a glossary, here are the key terms that we're talking about per the different incidents, is essential.
Kevin, how do you build relationships with people like Nick and also the nonprofits that are working in that same space between crises?
There's probably a million, so we could spend the whole afternoon on just trust building, and we could do a fall off the edge of the platform. But I'll throw out one, which is to offer, as opposed to always receive. So I think one thing that I see time and time again erode trust is when people only want to come to the table when they're in the need of receiving something, whether that's some kind of support, whether it's some kind of financial benefit. That's the best way to erode trust. The best way to, I think, bolster trust is when you're coming to the table with something to support, offer, something tangible to bring to it. And it doesn't need to be any one particular thing, like a financial resource. It can be a whole litany of things. But that, I think, is one of the best ways, along with communication and all these other things, to at least start forming the cornerstone of trust.
Jim, you talked about steps and reps when we were chatting at our call, and tell us a little bit about how, as a leader of a nonprofit, you're building those relationships as a convener in this space as well.
So one of the things in the crisis management world, we talk about your crisis management skills being perishable. And so what we continue to do is you exercise and develop, and you work on those skills, and you do it through a series of sets and reps. Like those was me, I'm not the example. You go to the gym and you do sets and reps and you develop muscles. The same thing with your relationship and your trust issues, you have to do the sets and reps. A big thing for me is to get off the island, because to interact with the private sector, the public sector, other nonprofits. I mean, Jarrett does an amazing job at American Red Cross. Just the interaction with people not on my island. So getting off the island is huge, because in government I used to always hate the fact I call it the Appalachian syndrome, where we did this inbreeding perspective, and we augured in, on ourselves, and so whenever I had an opportunity to get off the island, I got off the island to broaden my perspective. But in terms of the trust piece, when you get off the island, you may find that the person over there that's a triangular peg is actually not too much different than the person who's the circular peg or the square peg. So getting off the island I think is essential to it, and the sets and reps to continue to work on developing that trust and that collaboration, that cross-sector perspective, because it's perishable. And I know when my daughter was really little, she says, "Dad, you never break the trust because you can't put it back together again."
Yeah, that's good. We have a few minutes for questions of our panelists. Let's go, Alyssa.
First of all, thank you for sharing your perspective and your experiences. And this might be too broad of a question, but I'm wondering, given the range of dynamic incidents that all three of you have managed, what policies have really stood in the way of your ability to lead through those incidences? What did you do to overcome that, to persevere as a leader? And how do you think you could change that in the future?
Are there particular, you mentioned before some of the gifting policies that
Yeah,
you
and I think
face.
that's key, and
Yeah.
maybe Chief Featherstone can talk about it as well, but we run into hurdles, and, multinational company, we have to be sensitive to the local regulations, especially if we're dealing with incidents and then GDPR coming in, privacy, Europe. Amgen, 30,000 people, we have an awful lot of people with 8-year degrees. What do you think our number one degree is? We're a science-based company developing biopharmaceuticals to
Law.
save lives. Yeah, it's not MD, it's not PhD, it's JD. We're a law firm that dabbles in biotechnology. But as Chief Featherstone said, you need that, the MOUs and being able to do that. And so, are we allowed to do that? So we have these advocates in law that kind of really understand what we do in crisis management and in global security and intelligence, that understand our world. We've taken the time with them to be able for them, and then they have to fight a sea of other lawyers saying, no, you can't do that. So those are the policies in place, and we want to do the right thing. We never want to do the wrong thing or injure, make it worse for people, but that's the hardest part for us.
Can I just interject there, and that's the difference between policy schools and law schools. I mean, it's going to sound self-serving, but there is a perspective around the law that's limiting and what you can't do, and that is necessary. I don't dismiss that, but at the same time, I've found that at its best, what the programs around policy can offer is what can we do to make this work, as opposed to what can we do to avoid getting sued. And there needs to be some collaboration even between those disciplines, but at the same time, I think that is an important perspective, that the legal perspective versus an engineering perspective versus a policy perspective are different. Kevin, yes, and then we'll go to the next question.
So just in relation to that, I would also say, Jim always uses this term too, with great risk, great reward. So you'll risk a lot to save a lot. And sometimes you have to go out of the boundary of policy and procedures, right? But you as a leader, if you're worth your weight, you'll understand that you'll take on that liability, that risk for that big reward. So that's one thing I always tell people to keep in the frontal lobe is you need to be in it and make those decisions, and don't abdicate those decisions to other people, but more importantly, don't abdicate the responsibility. So sometimes you might not be in a position or a place to make that decision, but it's not fair for you to abdicate that responsibility to like the subordinate making that decision. So that's one thing is look at that policy and look at what its true aim is, the intent of that policy or that law, and then if you're going to achieve, even though you might be skirting it a little bit, hey, so somewhat you might have to. There's a great article by Thad Allen on crisis leadership where he discusses this. It's a Harvard Business Review kind of discussion that takes place, and he talks about this very topic. I know I've experienced it firsthand. The second part to that, and I'll try and rush through it, but we already talked about rebuilding in Sonoma, and we're going through this in Ventura also from the Thomas Fire. And I'll say that first and foremost, a lot of things can be redone, like policies can be reviewed and done really quickly. You just need to get the system working right away. So we started our recovery task force on day 2 of the incident. We started reviewing policies and ordinances that were going to impact what our long-term goals were going to be. And we expedited because we were under an emergency proclamation, and everyone was very sympathetic and empathetic when everyone's houses are burning down, right? 7-10 months later, people whose houses are going to lose their ocean view might not be so empathetic. So you got to strike while the iron's hot. Make those changes to policy and ordinances or state laws at the time when there's the political will to make that change, so that you don't have to do end arounds, and then go from there. And just know that it's going to be a lot of slow trudging at the later periods. But to be successful, you have to take that immediate action at the beginning.
Did I hear an inference to never let a crisis go to waste?
Exactly.
One last question. I want to draw in a dear friend, and I know he hates me. Oh, yes, Jared.
You know, you're not going to go over that lawyer comment.
Yeah. There's more to come.
A lawyerly reply
Yes.
to that. I would offer, from the perspective, in the same way that all public policy schools aren't sort of two-dimensional, you know, helping create more directors of registry of motor vehicles in Fresno. Not all law programs produce people that just want to sue.
Right.
And one particular place, that many law schools have to greater or lesser extent programs in. It's a great place, I think, for you to plug into, or for us to think about plugging into, is the traditional clinic program.
Yeah.
Clinical programs are not always just about suing in court.
Right.
The law school I happened to go to, Georgetown, had programs in public policy,
Right.
legislation as well, and they were directly about doing cross-sector. We didn't have that vocabulary way back then,
Right.
but
Yeah, and I guess what I was saying
there are
is,
opportunities there.
yeah, and we have a joint degree here with our law school, and also with our School of Dispute Resolution. So what I was saying was not a perspective of wanting to sue, but of wanting actually the opposite, to avoid these.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and again, that's an important protective mechanism that a legal perspective offers, but I think it can make more difficult these kinds of cross-sector collaborations.
It should be more, how do we get to yes?
Yeah, which is a book we use in the program. Yes, Senator.
My question has to do with, to what extent in the disaster preparation and response community, the cross-sector collaboration approach is institutionalized, and to what extent is it in organizational culture? And to what extent is it supported by the externals?
Yeah, Jim, do you want to? You've worked across the sectors.
I think it's very much a part of the crisis management world. I don't think that it comes into play or really becomes significant until we have those, ironically, the windows of opportunity. Like, people really, this is not just Southern California, I think it's American. We really don't care about a disaster until it's at our doorstep or it's actually leveled the house. And so I think that the cross-sector concept comes into play when the sky begins to darken, literally, and then right after, when there's debris and dust in the air. And I think, like you were saying, you have to be ready, because that window of opportunity is elastic. And as the further we get away from the last significant issue, that window closes in exponential ratchets down. So I think that we have to be prepared, Nick, Kevin, and myself. It's kind of like what Karen was saying when she presented that thing to the bankers up in her part of the world, that the city had things already teed up. So I think the cross-sector community needs to have shovel-ready efforts and projects ready to shove through that window of opportunity. Because on the average day, the ROI for what we do in our world, nobody cares.
Kevin, did you have a thought?
Well, I just have a follow-on actually to the lawyer comment. But I'll answer that question too, Les. So one of my best friends when I'm working an incident is our lawyer from our county council assigned. But how I negotiate that relationship with her started beforehand, and it ties into this trust issue. So she understands that she's going to be a really good advisor and counsel, but not a decision maker. And she actually leaves the room once we're making decision. So we'll stack up all of the facts and everything that we're weighing, and then she has complete exposure to what's going on to provide us with really good judgment and counsel, and tell me where I can push the line, where I can't push the line, and if I do push the line here, these are the potential liabilities that I'm going to face. And then she goes about doing her work in other capacities once I get ready to make the decision. So that's one relationship that we've fostered that's been very, very successful. Because everything I do ends up bearing some kind of liability, whether it's to the county, to the sheriff. So I can't just turn a blind eye to it. And there's a level of analytical thought that comes from a lawyer's training that definitely I didn't get in any of my experiences or training. And they look at problems differently. And for me, that's been a huge benefit. So just one way to prevent us getting sued, but also prevent us from having to sue too. So as far as the preparedness question, I'll throw it back to what Jim had said, and then I'll raise the ante, which is there's no ceiling nor floor to the preparedness world, right? So everyone owns that space, and everyone can invest as much as they want into that space, and it's not your traditional zero-sum game. In my perspective, everyone in Ventura County should be pushing the message of preparedness, and everyone should have some sort of proportional investment in the preparedness topic. And that comes from a variety of different perspectives, whether it's disaster kits, whether it's signing up for emergency notification tools. Now, granted, out of preparedness, there becomes some very specific roles to play. So I'm the alert and warning authority for the county. So when it comes to actually producing the emergency notifications, that's a very specified role that comes from authorities. However, getting people to sign up for my emergency notification, I'm all game for everyone. So for example, at Amgen, we give them all of our emergency notification brochures, everything like that, and they're a big advocate for all of their employees to sign up for our emergency notification system. And then boom, we just got 3,000 plus people in the county, plus all of their network to sign up for something that if that relationship didn't exist, wouldn't have occurred.
Very quickly, can I
Yeah.
interject?
Yeah,
So at Amgen, and those of you in the private sector, you can do this. This Wednesday, if it doesn't rain, I was hitting up Kevin for the weather report for Wednesday. If it doesn't rain, we have a disaster preparedness fair. We have 10,000 people based in Thousand Oaks. We line everything up with Ventura County Search and Rescue. We have disaster kits that people can sell. They can recharge fire extinguishers. Once a year, do that. And we remind people we have places where they can sign up for the notification alerts. So you have to put this within the culture of your company and for the employees, because they are the ones that have to be aware of it. You keep on reminding them, enable them to take advantage of these. It works.
Well, let's give a thanks to our panel. Thank you.